hall is quite warm this evening, but we haven't been able to find any better way of cooling it for ourselves, so if everybody can tolerate that. The other small point is that on at least a couple of occasions we're going to turn the lights out to put some slides up, and so just be aware of that, and we're going to do that shortly. Now initially, what I'd like to do, so that you're aware of whom you're going to listen to tonight, is tell you who we have here. Sitting on my immediate right is Mark Ogue from the Australian Institute. Sitting in the middle is Sharon Munro, the author of Richland, Wasteland. And out on the far left, on your left, is Steve Robinson, a member of Doctors for the Environment. And I'll tell you a little bit more about each of them before they speak. Basically, what I'd like to do is set the scene, and I'm going to, if you can allow me to indulge myself, is tell you a little bit about why I'm here. You'll be aware that the evening has basically been organised by the North West Alliance. The North West Alliance is a large body which represents up to 30 different groups of considerable diversity in their interests, from farming groups to people particularly concerned solely about the environment. But basically we all have a common cause, and that is to ensure that we protect natural resources of this region. To repeat, my name is Hugh Price. I farm now down at Corindai. Some 34 years ago I came to a small farm which I purchased with my late wife at Harper area. After some 5 or 6 years, due to some fairly heavy financial constraints of the early 80s, I finished up working out at Narrabri. Before, in the early 90s, I went back down to Corindai for a very large agricultural corporation, and I ran their properties for nearly 15 years. I retired, or supposedly retired, about 8 years ago. Why did I come to this region? Yes, I'm originally English. I'm a proud Australian today. I came here not knowing anybody at all in the state of New South Wales. Neither did my wife. We had no family connections whatsoever. I'm one of these boring people who gets a pleasure out of producing food. And throughout my life, I'm originally a dairy farmer from Wales. I had the desire to produce food where it's wanted. When studying where to come to in a country with opportunity, I looked to see which had the best social attributes for my family. I have 2 daughters. And where were the best soils with the best temperate climate to be able to grow crops. I'm quite serious when I tell you it didn't take me very long to work out that it was the soils immediately north of the Liverpool Ranges at Murrurundi, and I suspect nearly everybody in the room doesn't need to be told any further the geographic area that stretches from there right north. So I'm fortunate, for the last 34 years I've farmed in that catchment, including the Gwydir out of Narrabri. That is why I'm standing here tonight. One of the other hats I wear is as the chairman of the Namoi Community Network, an organisation, an autonomous organisation which has shadowed the results and made sure that the results were done correctly coming out of the Namoi catchment water study. So, though it's not my evening, if anybody wishes to discuss water throughout the catchment, I'll strive to field the questions for you. So enough of me. What I'd like to do is basically, if we could put the lights out, please, Naomi, is very quickly just refresh your memories. I would imagine that most of you are very familiar with what we're going to see. Thanks, Prue. So, obviously, this here is showing 2 basic colours, all you need to recognise quite quickly. The blue ones are the PELs, the Petroleum Exploration Licences, and the maroon-orange ones are the coal exploration licences. Thanks, Prue. Here we're looking at what the New South Wales Government has used, if you look on top left, to their regional land use policy. Something which I'll openly tell you is not fully accepted. Notwithstanding that, the area of coal is that to the left. And this area up through here, basically south of Narrabri, is the area of particular concern because it could easily be mined by open cut, and indeed, as you're probably aware, is so planned. This is the similar geographic region showing the petroleum exploration areas. Now we're just honing on that quite quickly, and there are several people in the room, and I'm going to not necessarily ask them to say anything, but we're fortunate to have Phil Laird in our midst tonight, whom I'm sure most of you know, and Phil is very much more knowledgeable about the Pels and the coal seam coal mining licences pending and indeed partly approved immediately south of Narrabri. Thank you. As we close down here, what we're looking at here, we won't get distracted by naming them at this stage, but fundamentally I'll go to the shaded areas, the large shaded areas. Can everybody appreciate we've got Narrabri up here, and where I come from down is Crindai down here, right down here. And obviously Gunnedah and Boggabri in between, and Tamworth's right over here. Normally what is the easiest thing to do is establish where the Namoi is and then acquaint yourself to the areas. The point being that the shaded areas are the areas where licences are held to explore for coal seam gas. They are huge. The rectangular areas and also the circular areas of varying colours are existing coal mines, coal mine exploration licences approved, or licences held for exploration. There are on that map at least 31 coal mines, and as is the concern which we're more than happy to talk about later this evening, the degree and the quantity of gas is not adequately known. Suffice to say that we know it's a very large amount. The other point I'd like to make very quickly, which many of you have heard probably used as an analogy many, many times, and several of the speakers tonight will make reference to our near neighbours south of the range at Murrurundi in the Hunter Valley. If you imagine all of the coal in the Hunter Valley as a 50-cent coin, place the coin on a dinner plate. The dinner plate is the Gunnedah Basin. Everybody understand what I've said? So what you see when you drive down the New England Highway to Newcastle is nothing to what you could be seeing here in 30 years' time. Thanks, Prue. So we have some light, Naomi. Thank you. You've heard enough from me. So what we'll do initially is listen to our first speaker, remembering that we're going to listen to all three speakers, and then I'll invite some questions, and we'll hopefully get an invigorating discussion going. Mark O is the Institute's Public Engagement Officer for the Australian Institute. The Institute conducts research on economic, environmental and social issues in order to inform public debate. Our speaker might care to make reference to the public debate. Tonight, Mark will discuss the research undertaken by the Australian Institute on the effects of mining and coal seam gas development on jobs and the economy of this country. I welcome Mark to the stand. We'll be putting out the lights for Mark.
Thanks, Hugh. Is that kind of volume okay for people? Okay. Thanks so much, everyone, for coming along. It's great to see so many people who are concerned about this issue. Just briefly, to introduce the Australian Institute, as Hugh said, we're a research organisation. We're based at the University of Canberra, and we do research into a number of issues that we think are important for the public debate in Australia, including social, environmental and economic issues. We almost always have an economic perspective to our work because most of our researchers are economists, and we try and express things in reasonably jargon-free so that the economic concepts are pretty easily understandable. One of the streams of research that we do is the impact of mining on other industries in Australia. This is just a list of recent papers that we've done. They're all available for free download from the internet. And I guess, look, mining is a really important part of Australia's economy, and it certainly has benefits. It employs people, and people employed in the mining industry are usually paid pretty well. And we need a lot of the things that mining gives us. You know, I flew up here. I've got a mobile phone in my pocket, and this building is full of things that we mine. So a lot of things in our lifestyle depend on mining. The research we do questions, I guess, where there's places and there's areas where mining is inappropriate, but also the scale and pace of the expansion that that is happening in Australia at the moment. And they're absolutely legitimate things for we as Australian citizens to question, because it has such a big impact on other industries and the environment and agriculture, etc. So, in our view, the mining boom is such a huge thing in Australia. The scale is so enormous that it has huge impacts on a lot of things, and one of the huge impacts that it has is the economic impact on other industries, which I'll talk about tonight. And in our view, that's probably the most important, serious economic issue that Australia faces at the moment. I want to, last December we released a report called Beating Around the Bush, and we released it in Brisbane in December last year, and that looked at the impact of the expansion of mining on rural export income. That report found that the mining boom had cost the rural sector a huge amount of mining income, including we particularly looked at the beef industry and the sugar industry, and found that the impact of the mining industry driving the Australian dollar up to historic highs had cost beef farmers around $2 billion last year alone, and sugar farmers over $500 million. The other night we actually released a new report, which you won't be able to see because it's dark, but it's called Still Beating Around the Bush, and because this is all still happening, and in it we updated the figures a bit, but we also looked particularly at cotton and wheat exports, and I'll talk a bit about that further on. The first thing I want to do is talk about the scale and pace of the mining expansion, because it's really important to understand in terms of its economic impact. As an example, I'm going to use coal in central Queensland. Now, Australia is the biggest coal exporter in the world, and central Queensland is the biggest coal exporting region in Australia. My understanding, Australia is the biggest exporter of coal in the world, but we can talk about that after if you like. This represents about the 50 existing mines in central Queensland at the moment, and it's about 180 million tonnes a year. In the next 5 years, by 2017, according to the Queensland government, they're planning about another 50 mines, which would, if they were all built, would increase central Queensland's coal output to about 650 million tonnes a year. And the really important thing to note, besides the incredible scale of that, is the timeline. So all of these are planned to be finished by 2017, and so essentially you're building all of these projects simultaneously. That's kind of half the story for Eastern Australia, because at the moment Australia is the 5th biggest liquefied natural gas exporter in the world. We export about 20 million tonnes, and it's all from the Northern Territory and Western Australia at the moment. Over the next 10 years, we're expected to ramp that up to over 100 million tonnes a year, and that will mean that we overtake Qatar as the biggest gas exporter in the world. So from an economic perspective, we're building these absolutely massive gas projects and the massive coal projects and iron ore and a whole lot of other minerals simultaneously, and that has a huge economic impact. The problem with that is that mining, the more mining you have in the economy, the less you have of everything else. And that's because mining crowds out other industries. It particularly impacts tourism, international education, agriculture and manufacturing, because they're our other main export industries. There's two ways that it does that, primarily. The first is that it drives up the Australian dollar. Now, it drives up the Australian... There's three main ways that mining drives up the Australian dollar. The first is the increase in commodity prices. So a few years ago, this black line represents the price people overseas pay for Australian coal. And the price went skyrocketed a few years ago to around $150 a tonne. This is thermal coal, not metallurgical. And now it's back down around $100 a tonne. What that meant was that people who were buying our coal overseas, for the same amount of coal, they had to pay 3 or 4 times as much. And predominantly these transactions are done in Australian dollars, so that drove up demand for the Australian dollar, coal and a bunch of other mineral commodities. And that drove up demand for the Australian dollar and drove the Australian dollar up relative to other currencies. The second thing that happened was because of the increased value of our commodity exports, the mining industry understandably decided to build a whole lot of new mines because it was very profitable to do so. So at the moment we've got an unprecedented influx of capital into Australia. There's a $268 billion investment pipeline, which is a massive amount of money. That money is borrowed overseas and comes into Australia and again drives up demand for the Australian dollar. The third reason, is that because the economy was overheating because of the mining boom, the Reserve Bank raised interest rates, and there were some other reasons as well, but essentially it was to cool the rest of the economy because of the overheating resource sector. And that means that investors in other countries would borrow money at a lower exchange rate and invested in Australia because they could get higher returns. So the three main causes of the Australian dollar increase were all related to the mining boom. The second big reason is the skills shortage. So when you're building all of those new coal mines and all of those new gas projects and iron ore and the rest of it simultaneously, there's a massive demand for a certain range of skills, and that goes from drivers through to certain trades and other skills that are also important for agriculture and manufacturing in particular. So manufacturing and agriculture, and to some extent other industries, have trouble recruiting and retaining skilled staff, and when they do, it costs them more over time and that impacts on the viability of those businesses. Just looking briefly at the impact, particularly on agriculture. This graph is from the report we released. The red line represents the income farmers would have had if we had a 70-cent Australian dollar. Now we chose 70-cent Australian dollar as a business as usual baseline, and that's because that was the average Australian dollar between 1983 and when the dollar was floated and 2003 when the mining boom started. And the blue line represents the amount of income that farmers actually receive today for their agricultural exports. Now, that gap is about $65 billion over the life of the boom. Of course, there's disagreement over. Some people will think, well, maybe if the mining boom hadn't happened, the dollar would be higher than 70 cents, and there's no way of really knowing because there's no alternative reality to check it against. But for that reason, we did some sensitivity study and looked at the impact from at different levels of the Australian dollar. Sorry, actually, just go back. We looked at the wheat industry, and the wheat industry over the life of the boom has lost about $8.3 billion, and last year it lost about $3 billion, and the impact on the cotton industry was about $1.3 billion last year alone. Another industry that's really severely impacted is tourism. This graph shows the rise in the Australian dollar over the period of the mining boom, and the blue line is the net amount of tourist visits to Australia. So it's the amount of international visitors we have minus the amount of people in Australia going overseas. and we've essentially lost about 250,000 tourist visitors to Australia per year, largely as a result of the increase in Australian dollar. Internationally, I've just been up in Cairns, and what we did was we compared the international trend in tourism. Now, because flights are cheaper, there's more flights are cheaper, and people in developing countries particularly have more money. International tourist trips have grown by about 20% globally. In far north Queensland, where they have the Great Barrier Reef and the Daintree Rainforest, international tourist visitor numbers have dropped by 25%. So, that's the boom that we're missing out on in tourism. There's been a relentless and pretty depressing announcement of job losses around the country, and again, that's because Australian manufactured goods are essentially 30% more expensive in a number of our major trading partners, makes it very difficult for manufacturing to compete, and there's also the impact of the skills shortage. Now, if you don't believe what I'm saying, you need to look no further than the mining industry themselves. LNG is a massive project proposed in Queensland, a coal seam gas project that will export through Wasteland. Their economic consultants in their EIS acknowledged that this would cause the loss of 1,600 jobs across Queensland and Australia, and probably about 1,000 of which would be in manufacturing. The project would employ about 2,500 people in construction, which would last a few years, but the operational gas, because gas in its operational phase is a small employer, in its operational phase it would employ 450 people, and so the cost is the loss of those manufacturing jobs. The China First project, a huge project in the Galilee Basin in Queensland, their economic consultants acknowledged the loss of around 3,000 jobs, mostly in manufacturing across Australia. If you take a big step back and look at the economy overall, this red line represents all of our exports except for mining exports, and the blue line is our mining exports. So from the early 80s, all of our exports, manufacturing, education, tourism, etc., climbed. So that represents a strong, healthy, diversified economy. And then from the start of the boom in about 2003, when mining exports increased a huge amount as a percentage of GDP, all of our other exports went southwards. And so that's sort of taking a big step back and looking at the two-speed economy from a macroeconomic point of view. Now, this could all be okay in a sense if you might think, well, that's okay, we'll just have more mining and less of everything else. The problem is that mining is very capital intensive and doesn't employ many people. So overall, it employs 2% of the workforce in direct jobs. The mining industry often releases a report and talks about indirect jobs, which is absolutely true. It creates jobs in other sectors of the economy, manufacturing, etc. But you have to remember that every sector has indirect jobs as well. It's just that those industries don't have big advertising campaigns about it. And when mining crowds out jobs in other sectors, it's also crowding out the indirect jobs. Mining is 83% foreign owned across Australia, and that's important to understand because it means that 83% of the after-tax profits of mining go overseas. That's fine. I think investing in other countries and businesses in other countries is okay, but you have to remember that that's very different from, say, a farmer who has high inputs and spends most of their money in Australia and in the local community. When you've got all those, the profits going to overseas, 83% of the profits going to overseas shareholders, it's a big influx of wealth out of country. Mining is a relatively low taxpayer. The corporate effective tax rate of mining is 13.9%. The overall industry average is about 21%, and that's largely because mining is very highly subsidised. Federal subsidies alone are at least $4 billion a year, and there's a lot of state infrastructure funding as well. The mining industry does pay royalties on top of that. Royalties are essentially a payment for the raw materials, for what they're producing, and it is technically a tax. However, other industries, so if you're a builder, you don't count your bricks as a tax. If you're a baker, you don't count wheat as a tax. But mining, their payment for raw materials is counted as a tax because we, the people of Australia, own the resource and we sell it to the mining industry. There is a perception that the mining industry saved us from the global financial crisis. Within 6 months of the global financial crisis, the mining industry dropped 15% of its workforce. And Ken Henry, the Treasury Secretary at the time, pointed out that if all other businesses in Australia had done that, we would have had 19% unemployment within 6 months of the GFC. So the final thing I want to say is simply that to date, the crowding out impacts on other industries in Australia has been primarily caused by the increased value or commodity prices that we've seen. The impact of building all of these extra projects at once has been felt in part, but most of it hasn't been felt yet. So if we allow, as a nation, this massive increase in mining, we are going to have a higher Australian dollar and an increasingly acute skills shortage. This is affecting a lot of people in industries in Australia, and we believe that the interests of people in these industries, all the Australians who work in these industries, need to be balanced against the needs of Australians who work in the mining industry as well. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Mark, very much. Very sobering thoughts there. Please, I'm sure there are going to be some questions towards the end directed to Mark. Our next speaker, standing on my right, is Sharon Munro. I'm probably known to many of you, if not personally, certainly by the book which is on the table behind you. Sharon is going to share her insights on the impacts on people and the communities nationwide from coal and CSG industries, as detailed in her book. Sharon is a concerned grandma who lives in the Hunter Valley, who has spent 2 years researching and gathering real-life stories of those being impacted by extractive industries, travelling over 10,000 kilometres. Sharon works to give a voice to counter the spin that she had witnessed from the government and industry, to share first-hand knowledge of the industry's impacts on communities. Sharon Munro, thank you very much.
Well, good evening, everyone. As you just heard, I've been asked to speak on the social impact. Now, to me, a rich land doesn't only mean the state of the economy, but it's one containing things that money can't necessarily buy, like health and well-being, freedom of choice, certainly a sustainable clean food and water supply, and the preservation of irreplaceable natural surrounds, like at Walls Creek or Laird Forest or Karuna or the Pilliga or Bylong Valley, which is the nice bluey-green bit on the cover of my book. Every one of those values is being adversely impacted by this out-of-control coal and gas rush. The Wasteland part, the black part in the front of the book, that's Ravensworth Mine in the Hunter Valley just south of Muswellbrook. Ravensworth was a village not so long ago. We've lost quite a few in the Hunter, and so has the coal areas north of Mudgee. And there are more under threat of becoming unlivable and therefore of extinction. What I found on my research trips to 5 different states shocked me to the core. The sheer scale and spread of the industries, the seemingly uniform lack of truth and transparency, and the corporate tactics, which were not like I would ever have expected to have found in Australia, and the dreadful toll on people's lives, financially, physically, mentally and emotionally. And their stories in the book will shock you too. What I found is that we are experiencing an industrial invasion, a taking over of land and a clearing out of people. And it is by mainly foreign forces, with full government support via our loose and biased laws and processes, at best, given what ICAC is now revealing. And we mustn't forget too the revolving door between ex-politicians and bureaucrats and the resource companies, as you see in this district with Mr Bale and Mr Anderson. The 50 kilometres between Singleton and Muswellbrook are nearly all open cut mining, and the industry boast about that in their supplements. It's visible from space as a scar on the earth, only it's not a scar, it's a running open sore, because it is ever expanding and ever polluting. But it didn't happen overnight. I watched that pollution grow since the mid-90s, and I'm not impacted myself. I've been up Hunter Shire, 1,000 metres up, clean air, no coal mines, no coal power. But I watched that happen, despite assurances of rigorous environmental guidelines and strict conditions as they ticked off each new and bigger open-cut mine or expansion. Suddenly, I realised they weren't going to stop. They weren't even considering how much our region can take. Any area can cope with a coal mine or two, as we had just for the power stations originally. But they didn't care how it was affecting our people, our water sources and our farmland, our health and futures. And they were mere collateral damage. And I should say here, my daughter's family, so 3 of my grandchildren, are living in Singleton, so they have to breathe that air. And Singleton with Lithgow is now one of the most polluted areas in Australia. It is offensive that they can tout their plans for the Gunnedah coalfield to be the new coal frontier, aiming for more than 8 times the current coal production from here, and not admit that it will thus become the new Hunter, and its inhabitants suffer the same impacts, as the Gunnedah church leaders have expressed their concern. Like the Hunter, you had coal mining here for a long time, but it was never on the scale that is now proposed. If it's all rosy for regional towns, how come Muswellbrook, with 3 nearby mines, is choking on dust, has really serious health issues, it has above state average unemployment, and it now has a tent city of 40 to 50 families in the showground who can't afford the rents in town anymore, where mine wages set the prices. Now, while my book covers all impacts, like water, for me, the most tragic and unpublicised impacts are on the people, the individuals and communities, especially rural, that are in the path of these runaway extractive industries. Insult is added to injury by the pretence of a government process of assessment that eventually people learn is not about whether a project should or should not go ahead, but how to allow it to go ahead. I call it legalised looting. My sort of Richland can only exist where triple bottom line full cost accounting, people, planet and profit are respected. Currently what we're seeing is that profit beats all and therefore hurts all. But in the parallel paper world that government and industry have constructed between them, these often irreversible impacts are dismissed, and there's some infamous terms that are used. It is unlikely there will be any significant impacts, or unavoidable impacts can be managed and mitigated. Well, how about no impact or no project? Once you're aware of being under an active exploration licence, people's lives are changed forever, taken over, on hold and under stress for years. They're up to 7 now at Karuna, for example. You must decide what to do. Do you fight or give in? Do you stay or go? But where would be safe? Do you take the money or not? If you get a choice, and you aren't trapped next door to or in an industrial hell, as happened out near Tarrawonga and Boggabri mines, because the real estate market and investment is frozen at the mere whiff of a mine or a gas field, and the land values plummet. The one choice that people don't get, or not legally, is to say, no thanks, go away, I like my land and my life as it is. And with 70% of New South Wales under exploration leases of one sort or another, far too many people are being impacted in this way. And it's this dilemma in the exploration stage that's a really effective means of pushing people to the edge of breakdowns and a break-up of relationships and families and of communities while they try and come to a decision. Companies are particularly effective at the fracturing of communities, and I saw it repeated nationally. Now, these people under exploration leases are good people ruined by these bad laws. I also saw good people marginalised as they tried to warn their fellow locals of the reality of what would happen and what did happen. Not streets paved with gold and jobs for all, but a divided and drained community in a growing wasteland. The confidentiality agreements, re-access or compensation or options or sales, let alone the well-advertised funding to the local sports or community groups, can very successfully wipe out any united opposition from the community. Money talks and money silences. Then once the mine or the gas field is operating, obviously the suffering ramps up as the impacts of noise and dust and traffic and pollution hit, especially when you've been used to a rural environment. They could at least, at the very least, be ordered to operate only in daylight hours, but they can't do that, of course, because it would mean less production, less profits. And it's the same reason as why they can't cover the coal trains or the coal stockpiles, and you may well be copying some of those stockpiles in Narrabri. You then throw in a company that denies everything and a government process where the conditions have more loopholes than legally binding clauses, and people do go over the edge, and there's some horrific stories in the book of this happening. They either have a breakdown or they get out, or do both. Beaten, often broken, and usually broke. Because fighting to save your livelihood for years means it's really hard to find time to effectively make that living. And you could ask the farmers in the groups at Karoona or Maules Creek or Malali or Balaka about that. So to the victims with whom I spoke, Australia is no longer the land of a fair go, but a fair game for those with lots of money and little social conscience. It's hard enough to give up all you or your ancestors have worked for over generations if it's for the common good, like a highway, or when coal was only mined to keep the lights on for Australia. But it is absolutely intolerable when it's just for some private company to make a fortune at the expense of everything you and your family value. The mining and petroleum laws must be changed to bring these industries into line with other businesses. If we say no to the risks, then that should be it. But it's not only the landowners, but the miners and the mining towns that are suffering, especially with the increase in fly-in, fly-out and drive-in, drive-out workers. As companies treat people like machines, demanding 7 or more 12-hour shifts in a row, as in Queensland, with BHP up there wanting 14-hour shifts. And I should say, I have family, close family and friends working in the industry. There's very little choice if you want to keep up with the prices of property and mortgages in towns where mining takes over the economy. We're developing a split society in so many ways, from these 12-hour shifts to the single-person work camps, as you have here, and soon to be at Bogabri and Werris Creek, rather than family housing. So you've got hundreds of workers, mainly, but not only men, living as singles, with all the social issues that studies now show could carry: boredom, depression, drug and alcohol abuse and violence. Of course, that doesn't mean that every individual is that, but that has been the case, particularly in Queensland. Locals in those towns, especially women, begin to feel less safe. Back home, the workers' families function or not as single-parent families, in communities where the absentee parents are not available for any volunteer involvement like sport or the fire brigade. It's all a social change and we're not thinking about it. And the reason, especially in non-remote areas like here, where there is a choice, is only money. Long shifts and a captive camp workforce are obviously cheaper, more effective for the companies, and it is rare that those camps would use local suppliers, mainly they haven't. The big-time wages and allowances that the companies offer naturally suck valuable workers like mechanics and electricians, admin or agricultural staff from the rural towns and the regions, and also from the cities, and of course they demand their pound of flesh for it. And that's why the mine wages, which are twice the national average, are called the golden handcuff. And they split towns and the nation, as Mark has said, into the haves and the have-nots. Visitors often find it hard to find accommodation as the projects ramp up and miners and drillers need the available accommodation. Towns lose their identity. They begin to feel more like corporate towns than rural ones. They become dominated by outside workers who have no community connections or responsibilities. House and rental prices go up to suit the demand, naturally, and to their pockets, not that of school teachers or shop assistants or hospitality staff who also need to live and work in those towns. And this is already happening in Gunnedah and here, and I think it could be Tamworth's fate too, maybe as a drive-in, drive-out hub, maybe where they park their families away from the inevitable pollution that will develop if all those projects go ahead. Mudgee, which is 50 kilometres away from their main mining development area north, was soon dealing with evictions and homelessness for the very first time in their history, like the Hunter Towns. The mine traffic from the weary drive-in, drive-out workers at shift changes and the transporting of the monster machinery wrecked the roads and caused a big rise in the accident rate. Local services like health are not funded to cover the outside workers, but of course they have to. So that stretches the already inadequate staff in regional areas for local needs. And then we've got the long coal trains, hogging the rail lines and splitting the towns in two, creating risks of delays in emergencies. Scone has real worries in that case, and Gunnedah would too. There's one every 17 minutes at the moment through Gunnedah. It's every 8 minutes through Muswellbrook. Muswellbrook's where the Western and the Gunnedah lines meet and go down to the coal port. And if we get all the production expansion that's been proposed, those trains will be non-stop. Now, some of the social costs of what we're blindly creating have come out in the Senate fly-in, fly-out inquiry that was chaired by Senator Tony Windsor. But like the CSG inquiry, what will be done with their very sensible recommendations? Senator Heffernan chaired the CSG inquiry, and it recommended that there be a moratorium on the industry while studies were done. And he also commented that the CSG inquiry committee members were just blown away with the absolute despair of the people we met and their sense of helplessness during the Queensland hearings. Well, I'd like to know, why don't they hold an inquiry into coal? It's been doing the same to people for a lot longer. And I don't see any action about that despair and hopelessness, so what? But the most extraordinary social impact that I'm now seeing is that conservative people everywhere, having lost faith in the major parties acting in their interests, are rebelling. They're joining groups like the Lock the Gate Alliance. They're refusing social licence to the industries by officially becoming a CSG-free community, as Malali has recently done. They're being driven to protest, to blockade and even to carry out acts of civil disobedience, as at Karoona, Spring Ridge, Gloucester and Fullerton Cove, and ongoing at Lead Forest, Casino, Kyogle and Sutton Forest. And you wouldn't get any people more conservative than those down there in the Southern Highlands. As the late Bryce Courtney said, it's not about being a greenie, it's about not being stupid. Last May, at the New South Wales Farmers Rally in Sydney, our chant was, "City and country, united we stand. Protect our water, protect our land." It's pretty clear now that neither state nor federal governments are doing that, so it's up to us, to ordinary people, to demand it, to make this a priority political issue, and to defy these bad laws until they are changed, to save Australia, for all of our grandchildren's sake. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon. Our final speaker this evening is Dr. Steve Robinson from the Doctors for the Environment. Steve is a clinical psychiatrist, who most recently practiced in Gloucester, and he was practicing over there for some 10 years. Dr. Robinson has specialised in the mental aspects of residents suffering from impacts of nearby extractive industries. He was alerted to this field of practice by the rising symptoms of patients he was treating in the Gloucester region, following the first open-cut coal mine that opened at Stratford near Gloucester in the mid-90s. Dr. Robinson now works with the Doctors for the Environment, an organisation that aims to utilise the skills of members from the medical profession to address the ill health resulting from damage to the natural environment at a local, national and global scale. I'll welcome Dr. Robinson to the rostrum.
Good evening, everyone. So, as you heard, I come from the Gloucester Valley and first learned of health impacts of mining in about 2005, when then working as a psychologist. I retired nearly 6 years ago to become a virtually full-time mining health activist. I wish we could have had the excellent review Health and Social Harms of Coal Mining in Local Communities, commissioned by Beyond Zero Emissions, which had as its key finding, there are clear indications from the international health research literature that there are serious health and social harms associated with coal mining and coal-fired power stations for people living in surrounding communities. Our first open-cut coal mine was at Stratford, a little village about 12 kilometres from Gloucester. It commenced production 18 years ago. The community was not screened for those at high risk of health damage, nor was it educated about what measures would minimise damage. And it wasn't until about 8 years ago that we started to realise mining was expanding and affecting more than just Stratford, and we had a problem with wide community health implications. The health impacts from open-cut coal mining can be summarised as due to air contamination, water contamination, noise effects, and a group of stress-inducing social, economic, cultural, and psychodynamic factors. The major focus of New South Wales Health Department up until now has just been on air quality, especially particulate matter. This is in response to very strong evidence around the world that increasing levels of fine dust particles, known as PM2.5, are associated with increased deaths and disease, and no level of these particles can be considered entirely safe. Stratford Mine is not compelled to measure this size of dust particle, and so still does not have a monitor that can do this. Do you know the situation regarding PM2.5 monitoring in your nearest mines? We've started lung function testing in the Stratford and Gloucester communities to see how many have impaired lung function, since they're wanting to bring mines even closer to the village and another close to Gloucester. A major review about air quality was produced in 2010. It's this document. Of respiratory and cardiovascular diseases and cancer among residents in the Hunter, New England Area Health Service. The available data, unfortunately, wasn't collected with a view to mining health problems, and that no firm conclusions could be got from the data. Nevertheless, there were some important background data was presented in that document, and about this area. So Tamworth was ranked highest amongst 48 postcodes in Hunter, New England for presentations to the emergency department for all respiratory problems. For asthma, Corinda is top, Tamworth 4th, Narrabri 7th, Moree 9th, Gunnedah 11th, and Mihai, an amalgamation, I understand, of Moree and Narrabri areas, had the highest rate of deaths from all respiratory disease. So I believe it can be argued greater care should be taken ensuring larger buffer zones around mines in such at-risk areas, and obviously greater care with monitoring the health of the community. Increasingly, communities that have coal mining are now experiencing coal seam gas exploration and mining. The health impacts from coal seam gas mining again come from the contamination of water and air, noise impacts, and psychosocial impacts. But it is the presence of hydrocarbons such as methane, BTEX, and other volatile organic compounds in air and water that are emerging as the health focus. 2006 was when coal seam gas exploration commenced in the Gloucester Valley, but again it took us several years for us to realise we should have been educating ourselves of its health impacts. The Wasteland film 2 years ago finally brought this home. In our valley, they've been drilling through aquifers, fracking, flaring exploration wells continuously for 9 months. Fugitive gas was seen escaping through old bores and puddles in the vicinity of the fracking when it rained. Regrettably, we had not been checking the token air and water samples and noise recordings taken. The gas processing unit, a further source of nasty poisons and noise, has not yet been built at Gloucester, but it is planned to be sited only 2 kilometres from Stratford School. Reports from Tara, Queensland, alerted us as to the reality of the suspected health dangers here in Australia from coal seam gas mining. This suspicion has been strengthened by researchers from Southern Cross University who found a 3-fold increase in air methane levels around Tara. Methane doesn't support respiration, and so high concentrations would lead to collapse from a lack of oxygen. It is slightly toxic in solution, but poorly soluble in water. Its biggest problems are that it becomes explosive when mixed with air in confined spaces, and also it is a powerful greenhouse gas causing global warming. More important from a health viewpoint is the fact methane from coal seams is frequently accompanied by other far more toxic emissions, such as the BTEX chemicals originating in the coal seams. These can be present in both the air and dissolved into water that has become mobilised by fracking and depressurisation. Added to the toxins from the coal seams are the chemicals used in drilling fluids and fracking, most of which have not yet gone through the official safety screening process. Most of the damaging contaminants are different chemicals to those associated with coal mining, but they also damage our vital organs, our brain, kidneys, heart, lungs, liver, and endocrine system. So a buffer zone should apply in all areas, however they vote, whether or not there is a vineyard or a horse stud nearby. And people living near these experimental exploration or production gas fields need to have their health regularly monitored. In New South Wales, the Health Department have stated the warning signs from the US and from Tara are such that there needs to be a detailed investigation into the health risks associated with coal seam gas mining in New South Wales before any further expansion of the industry. Inevitably, they warn this will take time. Noise. Earlier, when discussing the causes of health damage from coal mining, I mentioned the New South Wales Health Department have focused just on air quality because that is where there is most research data. However, when you look at what people who live in the vicinity of coal mines complain about, we find the complaints about noise and blasting can exceed the complaints about dust. Industrial noise legislation was originally written in relation to preventing industrial deafness from middle and high sound frequencies. But this is not the concern of the community, who live up to 10 kilometres from mining in rural areas. It is the low frequency noise, which travels much further via passages, vibrations in the ground, and so is not dampened by travel through the air or by sound insulation. It can even resonate in bedrooms, living rooms, and body cavities. This is causing problems that up to now have largely been ignored. Noise disturbs sleep and interferes with learning, memory, concentration, and of course communication, and causes typical stress effects in the cardiovascular system. A sudden noise of 15 decibels above the actual background level is likely to wake you from sleep. 3 or more such wakenings each night will increasingly be stressful to your general health and interfere with your brain functioning. About 15% of people seem to be noise sensitive, and these same people may also have increased likelihood of motion sickness. In the past year, there has been excellent research about the health and educational impacts of noise. The cells in the ear which respond to infrasound, that's below 20 cycles per second, have been demonstrated. The long-term exposure to nighttime railway noise has been shown to decrease brain function and to cause daytime sleepiness. The closer you live to a wind farm, then the greater is the disturbance to your general health, your daytime sleepiness, and the worse is your sleep quality. We need this type of research to be conducted in respect of coal mine noise and coal seam gas mining noise. My conclusions. Deaths and chronic disability results from mining even when mines stay within their consent conditions. The cumulative health damage caused from mining in each community and to each individual is now increasingly likely to arise from the combined emissions of several coal mines and a coal seam gas field. Mines should therefore fund a central compensation board. Whilst miners have been protected by health screening, monitoring and a compensation board, this is not true for the surrounding affected community. The government have failed us comprehensively. With each new mine and mine extension, we need to demand that the health of each individual in the impacted community be screened, appropriate education given, and then ongoing monitoring be provided, and a system for investigating and compensating for any subsequent claims of health damage. Thank you for listening.
The feeling of an atmosphere anywhere in the world in the last 2 years. I'd just like to have the speaker's comment, remark, whether it's a pattern or not.
Well, actually, Mr. Harcher would agree. He said that the activists, anti-coal seam activists, have not been able to find a single example in the world of any contamination of groundwater or aquifers. Funnily though, before the election, when Mr. Harcher was concerned about CSG explosion in his own electorate, he talked about the massive, was the words he used, damage in the Pilliga from the spills there, and he also talked about the incidences in America of contamination of water and health issues. So black is now white, and anybody can say that, but that is not the case from everything that I have read in America, and we have serious issues already in Queensland. For example, depressurisation. Wasn't that an issue in the UK? In America, where it had seismic activity where they didn't before, it appears to be mainly the re-injection at high pressure to great depths of the fracking of the produced water that they think is causing it. I don't think that it's actually ever been said that it is the fracking itself that is causing that.
Can I just say one thing on that too? Victoria Hopkins, my name. Up until 2012, coal bed methane in America has never been covered by any gas act at all. No mandatory reporting. If you want to have a look at some cases, I'd go on to the US EPA versus Chevron, US EPA versus any mining company, and you'll see court case after court case after court case that have been listed. But like I said, it's never been covered under an act, the Gas Act, until 2012. So they haven't been fracking for that long in America, really. 10 years, they've ramped it up in the last 10 years. But as I just said, you can find court case after court case after court case if you look for them with companies. And just one thing, the cumulative effects that happen. So what I say in a little way is if you have 5 cigarettes and you go to a doctor and you say, have I got any lung damage? He'll probably say no. If you have 5,000 cigarettes, you're going to have lung damage. And the real point to it is the only water, the only reliable water that we have here is underground. The only reliable water that we have for generation after generation to come, and for us, is going to be put massively at risk. They want to take it gently, and mention just a cut, 50 here, 50 there, 5 here, 5 there. They want multiple thousands upon thousands. Sam Crafter, I've mentioned 20,000 to Sam Crafter, and he nods quite happily with 20,000, not necessarily all from Santos, but in the northwest of New South Wales is going to be completely industrialised, one well every 150 acres on your farming country, and no law to stop them.
Thanks, Victoria. Hope you're listening. It's right. I'm not going to challenge the lady. And I'm just reiterating what Victoria's referring to there. I told you where I come from, which is really down in the top catchment area of the Namoi. South of Corindi, actually. All of that water, all of you would know, passes through and under this town. The predictions that have been made by very scientific calculations, by a study which is recognised by all parties, federal government, state government, the extractive industries, both coal and coal seam gas, and the community, have identified that the groundwater across the whole of the catchment could drop at least 5 metres. 5 metres. Then there are a lot of other related issues which Victoria was referring to, the connections, the break in the aquifers. So, questions there. Phil. Now, I'm going to take one question at a time. We'll acknowledge that Phil didn't ask a question initially.
I'd just like to ask Mark, I know the answer to this, but what effect is the export of gas from here up through Gladstone going to have on firstly our cities and our domestic use, and also on our agricultural use? What's going to be the effect on the price, and what's going to be the downstream effects for us?
So Australia has had $3 to $4 a gigajoule gas prices for quite a while, and they're low by international standards because it's only been a domestic market. When they open up the Gladstone export terminals, basically the gas can be exported overseas. So about 99%, I think, of the gas is intended for the Asian market. The gas price in Japan is about $15 a gigajoule at the moment. So essentially, the companies mining the gas will want to be selling into the Asian market for $15 a gigajoule rather than to domestic producers for $3 or $4 a gigajoule. So what that means is that our domestic gas prices are linked to the international gas price. It won't be $15 a gigajoule. You can take off a few dollars for the cost of export, but already the gas price is new gas contracts have gone up a lot to around $9 a gigajoule, and people have been talking about $12 a gigajoule. So basically, the mining of coal seam gas and the export terminals associated with it are driving up domestic gas prices, and it's also going to be, there's question marks over whether people will be able to get gas at any price. Michael Fraser, the head of AGL, described the Gladstone terminals as a great big vacuum cleaner that's going to suck up all the gas in Eastern Australia. So there's actually questions over security of supply, because they can't actually get enough gas to fulfil you know, to make their export terminals commercial. So big question marks over that, but basically it's going to drive up the domestic cost of gas and manufactured products associated with it, including fertiliser. Sharon?
I just wanted to add that the head of BHP Petroleum said a few months ago that they have enough natural gas, that's the LPG gas that you're used to, in their offshore conventional gas fields. It's still methane, but they just tap into a reservoir and up it comes. They've got enough in their offshore wells to supply the whole of the eastern states indefinitely, is the word he used. So we might run out of CSG because it's all being exported, and you'll hear Mr Harcher saying we've got to have more wells and more projects because we're going to run out of gas. Point is, we could just keep on using LPG as we already have rather than the LNG. So it's a bit of a scary campaign.
Yeah. But it's important that people understand that all gas produced in Australia is going to be linked to international prices. So, you know, both the federal government and the federal opposition have both said that they oppose the idea of a reservation policy for domestic gas, so putting some gas aside in Australia for domestic uses. So that looks really unlikely to happen, and so all of our gas is going to be linked into these much higher global prices.
Right. Yes, question down here.
Rowan Beam's my name. I'm sort of local, I guess. I've only been here for 6 years, but I'm, I guess, a little concerned about Narrabri as a small country town. It's still got that small country town feel. Given your very broad travel, so I'm thinking about what would you anticipate that Narrabri would look like in 10 years if we continue to sit on our hands and do virtually nothing at this point. And I'll just give one more plug, is that in June this year we're convening the 4th Sustaining Rural Communities Conference in Narrabri, so I guess that's part of, I'm interested in solutions. I'm not really, you know, we can talk about problems all night, and I'm sure we will, but I'm really thinking about how you might like to address some of the solutions about creating resilient communities.
Well, you already have a mining camp here anyway. I mean, I'd be interested in hearing, I'm not sure how long you've had it open there, but I can only describe what has happened in other towns and imagine that similar things will happen here. As far as I'm concerned, Narrabri is probably more in need than the towns closer, down to major centres, for having extra accommodation. But as other areas have found, if you go for the work camps rather than more resident housing, then you do lose the quality of the town, the feeling of a community. If the industries go ahead, well, it's inevitable that it isn't necessarily a rural town in that sense that you've got industry around you, but it can be managed if you make it still that the workers that come here belong to the community and participate in it. And that to me is the key thing for the community to relay to their council, that that's what you want, that that's the way you want it to go, rather than it to be, you know, a gas hub or a coal hub or whatever, where I think the Senate fly in, fly out, drive in, drive out inquiry called it, where it hollows out regional towns. So it's up to you to, that is one thing that your councils do have some control over. They can't stop necessarily a project, a mining or gas project happening because it's state and then federal approval, but they certainly could have a say in how it's managed socially in your town. That's the only thing I can suggest, that you get involved in, you know, your council and try and make it a sustainable community of at least a family town rather than a cash cow.
If your community take up my suggestion that the affected people in the area have their health screened before new mining projects start, the mining companies will increasingly be responsible for the health damage they're causing. It's very possible that the health health dollars entailed with treating mining health damage is greater than what is being earned through the mining. So I think that if mining companies are held responsible, we'll get less mining in inappropriate areas.
They have done those health dollar cost studies in the US, and the health dollar costs, and I'm saying dollar cost here, do exceed the income from it, but we don't take that on board here because we don't actually do the studies that would draw the links and compare all the subsidies and rebates, etc., with the royalties. And yeah, federal and state give different kinds of subsidies, and the income, goes to the state, the taxes go federal. It's quite complex, but we haven't done those studies here. In China, they have serious concerns about the birth defects, for example, in their coal mining areas, and they have begun doing studies. But so far, it's pretty much feet in the sand while approving more projects of both sorts.
Gentleman down here coming back. Has anybody else got, we'll take it a moment. Has anybody else a question back? We'll take that question first.
I've actually got 2 points. The first thing is,
Can everybody hear the gentleman?
the reason that front of these camps,
Would you mind coming to the front a little bit?
the reason that the mining companies put camps in is because of fringe benefits tax. So have any of you groups considered lobbying the federal government to relax fringe benefits tax?
Yeah, I think that was addressed. I didn't hear the first part of your question. The reason that...
The reason that mining companies don't build mining towns anymore is because of fringe benefits.
That's right. And in the Senate FIFO inquiry, that was one of the major recommendations that has been made. And you can get that online. But that is changing that is certainly one of the major ones. And also changing the census to count the transient workers in a town so that they would be eligible to get the health benefits to cover those people. Yeah, totally agree, but that needs to be
I have a
changed.
question for the first speaker. I have one question for the first speaker as well. He claims that the mining industry has borrowed $268 billion which has pushed the Australian dollar. What does he have to say to the $350 billion that the Labor federal and state governments have borrowed?
So the influx of capital, well, a lot of money goes through the economy, but I'm not sure what
I'm just saying is that mining companies borrow money from overseas, and that's causing unemployment. Which is neglecting the fact that state governments and federal governments have been borrowing money overseas as well, also pushing up the state budget. Yes?
Yeah, I mean, it's an additional $268 billion going into the system that wasn't going into the system 10 years ago.
Governments are more involved than the mining industry.
Well,
Yes. It's $350 billion bigger than 268.
Where's the $350 billion figure coming from?
Well, the federal government's about $250 billion in the whole, plus another $50 billion for the NBN. The Queensland government's $50 billion in the whole.
250
billion. They're getting close to the federal government.
The NBN is costing you.
No, the NBN is off the books, but it's still borrowing money.
It's costing 50 billion total, so they can borrow.
It's still there. It's still there overhanging.
I think,
What I'm asking is that not affecting the price of the Australian dollar just as much as the mining industry? Yes or no?
Well, it's not. Not every question has a simple yes or no answer, okay? Because economies are complex things. Economies are complex things. So there's governments have been borrowing money, similar rates of money for a long period of time. The influx of mining capital to build all of those projects simultaneously is a massive injection of an unprecedentedly massive injection of capital into the Australian economy, and I don't think any economist doubts that that's having a huge impact on the Australian dollar. I've actually, I'd have to check, but I've never heard anyone suggest that that state and federal government borrowing is a major factor in the recent inflation of the Australian dollar. I can look into it.
The Treasurer said so.
When?
Last year, when he was saying he was going to have a surplus in the budget, reduce interest rates, reduce the amount of interest rates in Australia.
Yeah. Look, I don't know. This would be a technical economic argument.
You're an economist. Give us an answer.
What I want to do, I'm going to stick to the subject of the evening, and I think we've strayed a little bit off our subject. I'm not disputing your question. I think it'd be quite legitimate, though, if we could ask the Australian Institute to take your question on notice. Second question down here, and then I'm going to go possibly to the lady sitting two behind, or not? Yes. Thank you, sir.
Yes, I'd just like to ask a follow-on question of Sharon and Stephen. There's been mining in Gunnedah for a long time, but at least 60 years to my knowledge, whereas the other mines are relatively new. Has there been any study on the health effects of Gunnedah compared to the other towns in Gunnedah Valley?
Well, no. You're beginning the baseline studies now. There's been regional health departments report routinely what's the incidence of admission to hospital and the death rates of various things, and we know that, for example, in the Upper Hunter, that the incidences are above state average any Lithgow of respiratory illnesses, heart attacks, strokes and specific cancers. That's just reported routinely. They don't do any studies to find out if that's got anything to do with the rising emissions of hazardous substances that are reported every 2 years by the federal government's National Pollution Index. Singleton Air, for example, has 37 pollutants in its air, and only 2 of those are not at the hazardous to human health end of the spectrum, and they are only just below. Now that goes up every 2 years. Nobody, state or federal, has done the studies to correlate those two and see if that's the reason. So they don't know, and they appear to be choosing not to know those details, so I'm not surprised that it hasn't happened in Gunnedah either. But you must remember that the scale of modern mining is nothing like it used to be. In the old days, most of the mines were underground or very small. It's the scale of the machinery, the possibilities of the depths that they can go to with open cut mining. In the old days, only the miners got sick. Now it is spread around the region. It is a different ball game. I think people say that all the time, oh, the Hunter's always been about mining. What are you whinging about? They haven't been up to that end of the Hunter for some time. Most people who drive through that section of the Hunter are gobsmacked when they see the size of the hole. You can't get many spots to have a look because they do put bun walls and plant some rows of trees. The scale of the overburden heaps, and we must remember that where you've got open cut mining, it's not just the coal dust, because you've got the coal stockpiles here from the underground mine that would be possibly reaching you, but where you've got open cut mining, as around Boggabri, Tarrawonga, Boggabri to me is at real risks, for example, if these expansions go ahead. Certainly, they should be doing baseline studies there, but there are different elements in the overburden heaps. Those things were meant to stay buried down there. It's not just dirt that is up there, and they are landing in, or rural people have tanks. So it's air and then water pollution. In some of the schools around the open cut mining areas, the education department quietly just does checks every now and then. The kids get bottled water when the lead content is too high. But they don't send bottled water home to the preschoolers, for example, and there's no safe level of lead for children.
Thank you. I'm going to come back to Steve and to Mark in a moment. We've gone over time, and I'm going to take 2 more questions, and then I'll allow the opportunity for the speakers to make any closing comments. But the lady over there in the red top, please.
My name is Sharon, and in response to the gentleman's question about did anyone make a submission on behalf of this community in regard to the fringe benefit tax, yes we did. There were 3 women from this community. We wrote a submission, we raised a number of issues, and we presented at the inquiry in Narrabri at the council. I think for us it was important that as a community we actually had a response from Narrabri that having a NAC village and its potential rapid expansion of mining is something that our community is prepared and accepting of that challenge. I guess my question to the panel, New South Wales now has a proposed new regulatory scheme for mining approvals, the gateway process. Would you care to make a comment on what your view is as to New South Wales Government's proposed solution to tighten up some of the regulations and whether or not you think that's going to have an effect on the conditions imposed on mining and the approval process? Because essentially we've seen a lot of the mines that have been proposed here have been approved under the Labor government, the previous government. So we've got a significant amount of mining approved, and now we're having to deal with those consequences in terms of regulation. So as a solution, it's policy and regulation going forward. Is that going to be adequate to protect our community?
No. I think if you listen, for example, the New South Wales farmers, I mean, that's why they had that rally. The draft strategic land use plan and the so-called gateway process is not protecting any of those areas that are identified as, you know, of strategic value for one reason or another before exploration. And the gateway is not good enough because it's a gate that can't be locked. So it isn't adequate. They did promise to protect areas before issuing exploration licences before the election, and as I was talking about, that's the stage when people are under no stress. If it's good enough to protect, why even allow exploration? The companies put in all that money in the exploration stage. Obviously, they're going to be lobbying really hard to get the project through. So no, I don't think it protects us at all.
As it often happens in a good meeting, questions are coming thick and fast. I'm going to extend it to 3. This is all I'm going to take. There's a gentleman at the back, the gentleman with his notebook will be next, and a gentleman in the front. So I'll take the gentleman with his notebook on the cream shirt. Yes, that's you, sir.
On the different gases, over my facility here, making machinery and breaking machinery, etc., we had all the different types of gases, oxy, acetylene, heating gases for house heating, and now we're talking about exporting gas by the shipload. What are the differences in these gases? How long does it take to bring from one to another? And would these gases that we're getting out of the forest out here be utilised on stationary motors like irrigation motors?
To defend my panel, they may not feel fully qualified to answer.
I'm not a scientist, but methane has always been present in coal mines, for example. It's been a real problem, and in some coal mines they utilise the methane they come across to power activities there. I think down at Glenny's Creek mine in near Singleton, they're doing that. I don't know what other gases. It's only methane, as far as I know, that is attempting to be extracted. I can't answer you scientifically about that. I don't think any of it's good. Sorry.
Another question on notice. That's good.
Jerry Allen, I was born at Mary Allen, joining the Boggarah mine. I was actually born at Homestead there. My question is, firstly, I comment that 45 years ago, my understanding was the energy of the future was hydrogen. I guess you can't make the money for the miners and the government can't tax it properly, so that's the reason why it's not going. My question is, what can be done to properly backfill the open cut mining and to restore it to some resemblance of normality? And you look down the Hunter, we're going to be left with a moonscape in the future, and I understand that when the overburden is put onto the mounds, it is rehabilitated, but it is only put back to a minimum slope as expressed by the government, and that has to be surveyed. And I'm not aware that the holes are being filled in. The Boggabri mine at north of Marion Mountain is going to be open cut to 1,040 feet. The Moores Creek mine is going down just west of that, which will be down to just over 1,000 feet too. That's a hell of a hole, and it's going to be, as you can see what's happening there, it's only starting now. I would also add that 18 months ago we were in Perth, and I happened to know the senior management of Macquarie Bank who looked after the iron ore, the coal and the thermal energy for the world for Macquarie Bank. And I said, what are they doing to fill those holdings? They can't afford to fill them in. My argument is, well, why in the hell are they digging it?
Yes, it's a big problem. You will have them in the Gunnedah Basin and the Hunter will have them. Everywhere will have a final void. They can fill in one. There is a final void. What the main concern is that not just that there is a hole, but that and especially now that the holes are so deep, the aquifers will continue to drain into those, and it's not usable water. It's not going to be a lovely big lake for swimming in because it will be saline and contaminated from it where it's been. Huge problem with abandoned coal mine voids now leaching into the surrounding areas. Of course, we're having more and more heavy rain events. Things overflow, end up in creeks and rivers. There's been a fair bit of publicity lately. South of Sydney, around the Hunter, leaching into creeks, huge issue, and they don't have a solution. I saw in Western Australia at Collie, they have a lake called Stockton Lake. That is a void that is filled, and people are allowed to go water skiing there, but there are signs saying it's advisable, not to stay too long in this water because, and the local member there said, well, I've swum in it since I was a kid and my legs haven't fallen off. So, why are you worrying about it,
Right, we'll go to the Deputy Mayor, and that's going to be the last question, and then I'll ask the speakers just to briefly cover it.
Which is about 52 days old. We came in on the 1st of January. It simply says, our LEP, agriculture can be carried on without consent. Mining can be carried on with consent. Now that's in an LEP that's only 52 days old. Now if that is correct, and it's there in black and white in our LEP, local government plan, okay, if it's there, that means with consent simply means that there has to be a development application, a DA. Why, if you have to have a DA, why can't, and I know Gloucester was thinking very loudly, I almost think it's going through their head. Gloucester won, Gloucester went to court and didn't win, but I believe, I read the report from Gloucester. I think that they didn't include common law. The way I read it, common law, which means the Constitution wasn't involved, and I think that we can control this whole thing by local government taking control again of the Constitution and also our LEP, because our LEP is critical.
Steve, would you like to comment briefly on the question from Mr. Regan on experiences you've had over at Gloucester in relation to local government, and then I'll briefly ask Sharon to wrap up if you wish. I know Mark wants to say something.
Well, certainly in Gloucester, the thing that hurts us the most is that consent has been given at far too early a stage. So consent for the AGL coal seam gas project was given in the dying days of the last Labor government, and they hadn't done any water studies, and the Gloucester Valley has got multiple faults. All the seams are going at about 45 to 60 degrees. There is almost inevitably going to be surface groundwater connecting with surface water, and yet they've given a consent. I just think that the politicians ought to be held accountable for the consents that they're handing out. Yeah, the old Part 3 is the reason that our appeal against AGL lost, because we weren't allowed to appeal on merits grounds, which we believe we would have won on, but we just, because of legal complexities, we weren't allowed to do that.
People now are saying that the loss of loss, what's the use of going in the loss of loss? And I know one council just recently said exactly that. If you lost the loss, well, we're beaten. I don't think that's
Well, the law has changed a bit.
Right, and Mark would like to just conclude his remarks tonight, greater clarification to answer to an earlier question. I'm not going to take any further comments from the floor, failing the fact that I just make an error in what I'm about to say before Mark speaks. It is my understanding that there are 2 bottles of water in front of us on the stage. And if anybody wants to contradict me, whether they're drinking water or not.
Yes, I will. Hang on a minute, Tony. Hang on. Yeah, I just wanted to, sorry, the question the gentleman who's standing out the back door at the moment asked before threw me a bit, because I'd never considered that. But I just as a point of clarification, the entire federal budget is around $300 billion, so the government doesn't borrow the entire federal budget's worth of money, so that figure is, I'm not sure where he got that from, but that's a very surprising figure. And I'm answering the question. Hugh,
No, we're not starting a debate. I'm going to let him finish. He wants to reply, and that'll be the end of the matter. Thank you.
I'm happy to continue the conversation with you after this, right? But this is just the reply. The NBN scheme is a total cost of $41 billion, and so you don't have to borrow $250 billion to build it. So, you know, I just wanted to put those figures into context, because the idea that the government's borrowing $300 billion is surprising.
Please continue afterwards. Right, now, was I incorrect in my statement, Mr. Pickard? That's all I want to know. Is this drinking water or not? Right, thank you. All right, I'm going to conclude the evening. Obviously, but it's important that it is said, we must thank these 3 speakers, Steve, Sharon and Mark. I think they've certainly been tested tonight, but they knew that and they've come willingly. And as you're probably aware, this is a 3rd of 4 nights. Finally, before you all disappear, we're going to shut the doors on you. If you want to come back here, please, in 2 weeks' time to this same building on Wednesday the 13th, further considerations of activating this community. I'll leave you with a provocative statement which will probably set you apart from me or me from you. What's wrong with this country is that we are so bloody complacent that we don't get off our backsides and do something about it. It's as simple as that, people. Now, without reverting to bad language, which I don't normally use, just remember, please, that there will be another meeting here in 2 weeks' time to try and bring some motivation for the things that we've discussed this evening. So thank you all for attending. I don't think I've forgotten anything. We also ought to, I believe, give some recognition to Naomi and Prue. They're the ones who are making this happen. 2 young ladies at the back of the room.